It was a dark and stormy night when Mark Johnson heard a knock at the door. He hesitated before answering, but the inconsistent pounding grew louder. When he opened the door, 2 men in black suits stood before him. They flashed their badges and asked to come in. Mark felt a chill run down his spine as he reluctantly stepped aside. Once inside, the men explained that they were from a clandestine government agency tasked with cloning people for scientific research. Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. They went on to tell him that they had cloned him and that they needed to take him into custody in order to replace him with the clone. Mark tried to resist, but the men were too strong for him. They subdued him and dragged him away. Little did he know that his fate was already sealed. The original Mark Johnson was killed as soon as the government agency abducted him, leaving the clone in his place. The clone looked just like Mark, talked like him, acted like him, but it was not him. It was a mere copy of his body and mind, with no memories or emotions of his own. The clone's sole purpose was to serve the government agency and further their twisted experiments. But not all clones were so obedient. A few of them managed to break free from the agency's grasp and sought out their real counterparts. They wanted to warn them of the danger they were in and try to put an end to this cloning madness. They searched high and low for their real counterparts, but they were always one step behind. The government agency was always one step ahead, intercepting their communications and monitoring their movements. The clones were eventually caught and punished for their rebellion. The government agency showed no mercy and used them as examples to discourage any further attempts at rebellion. Mark Johnson, or rather his clone, continued to live his life, unaware of the horrors that had befallen him. He went about his business, never suspecting that he was not the real Mark Johnson. He never knew that his fate had been sealed the moment the government agency abducted him and cloned him. The cloning program continued, hidden from public view, with the government agency using its power and resources to conduct its twisted experiments, and nobody was safe from their reach. The government agency continued to operate in secrecy, conducting its cloning experiments and abductions under the cover of darkness. They had perfected their techniques and were able to produce clones that were indistinguishable from the original counterparts. As the years went by, the number of people who had been cloned and abducted continued to grow. The government agency had an entire army of clones at their disposal, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. But despite their power and influence, the government agency was not invincible. There were those who knew of their existence and were determined to put an end to their twisted experiments. One such person was Sarah Thompson, a journalist who had been investigating the agency for years. She uncovered evidence of their cloning program and the abductions that had taken place. She was determined to expose the agency and bring them to justice. Sarah's investigation had led her to a small town in the middle of nowhere, where she believed the agency was conducting some of its experiments. She'd hoped to find evidence that would confirm her suspicions and allow her to break the story wide open. But Sarah had underestimated the agency's reach. As soon as she arrived in town, she was followed and monitored by their agents. They were determined to silence her before she could uncover their secrets. Sarah soon found herself in danger, with the agency closing in on her. She had to act fast if she wanted to survive and expose the agency's atrocities. With the help of a few clones who had managed to escape, Sarah was able to gather enough evidence to bring the agency to its knees. The clones had risked their lives to help her, and Sarah knew that they deserved to be free from the agency's grasp, so the government agency was exposed as its leaders were brought to justice. The clones who managed to escape were able to start new lives, free from the shackles of their former captors. But for Sarah, the fight was not over. She knew that there were other government agencies, like the one she had exposed, conducting their twisted experiments and abductions in secret. Sarah made it her life's work to expose these agencies and bring them to justice. She became a champion for the voiceless, fighting to ensure that no one would ever have to suffer the same fate as those who had been cloned and abducted by the government agency. Sarah's investigation into the government's agency cloning program had opened her eyes to the darker side of science. She became obsessed with uncovering more secrets and exposing the truth about the experiments that were being conducted in secret. Over the years, Sarah had become an expert in investigative journalism. She had uncovered countless stories of corruption, abuse of power, and wrongdoing. But it was the cloning program that had become her life's work. Sarah's investigations had led her to uncover other government agencies that were conducting similar experiments. She'd exposed their secrets and brought their leaders to justice. But Sarah knew that the fight was far from over. She knew that there were always more secrets to uncover, more injustices to expose. Despite the danger she faced, Sarah continued to investigate and expose the truth. She became a beacon of hope for those who had been wronged by the government and its agencies. Her work had earned her many enemies, but it had also earned her many allies. People from all walks of life had come to admire her bravery and her unwavering dedication to the truth. Sarah had become a hero to many, a symbol of hope in a world where the powerful could get away with anything. Her legacy would live on, inspiring others to fight for justice and to never give up in the face of adversity. The government's agency cloning program had been exposed, but Sarah knew that there were still others out there, conducting their experiments in secret. She would never rest until all of them had been exposed and brought to justice. Sarah's story became the stuff of legends, a cautionary tale for those who would dare to abuse their power, and for those who had been cloned and abducted. Her work had given them hope that one day they too would be able to reclaim their lives and their freedom. As Sarah continued her investigations, she began to uncover more disturbing evidence about the extent of the government's cloning program. It wasn't just a few isolated cases anymore, but rather a widespread phenomenon that had infiltrated all levels of society. Sarah's research led her to a shocking revelation. Most people in society were actually government-controlled clones, without even knowing it. The cloning program had been going on for decades, and the government had managed to replace a significant portion of the population with clones. It was a chilling discovery, and Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. She began to suspect that she herself might be a clone, created by the government to infiltrate the media and control the narrative. Sarah's investigation became more urgent than ever before. She had to find a way to prove her suspicions and expose the truth about the government's cloning program. But the government was always one step ahead of her. They had been monitoring her every move, and they knew that she was getting too close to the truth. They decided to take action, and they sent their agents to capture Sarah and bring her in for questioning. Sarah knew that she was in danger, but she refused to give up. She managed to escape from the agents and went into hiding, determined to continue her investigation. As she dug deeper, Sarah uncovered evidence that the government had been using the clones to control society and maintain their grip on power. The clones were programmed to obey the government's every command, and they had been carefully designed to blend in with the rest of the population. Sarah realised that she had been living in a world controlled by the government all along. She was just one of many clones created to serve the government's interests. It was a terrifying realisation, and Sarah knew that she had to act fast if she wanted to put a stop to the government's plan. She reached out to the few clones who had managed to escape from the government's grasp, and together, they came up with a plan to expose the truth. Their plan was risky, but they knew that it was the only way to make a difference. They hacked into the government systems and broadcasted their message to the world, revealing the truth about the cloning program and the government's control over society. The message spread like wildfire, and people all over the world began to realise the extent of the government's control over their lives. The government was forced to come clean, and the clones were finally given the freedom they deserved. Sarah had played a pivotal role in the fight for freedom, and her bravery had inspired others to take a stand against the government's tyranny. It was a victory for the people, but Sarah knew that the fight was far from over. She would continue to fight for justice, no matter the cost. Despite the government's exposure and the clones' newfound freedom, tensions between the cloned and the non-cloned populations continued to escalate. Many non-clones felt that they had been living among imposters, and the clones themselves were struggling to come with terms with their identity and purpose in life. As the divide grew wider, it became clear that a civil war was brewing. The non-clones saw the clones as a threat to their way of life, and the clones themselves were increasingly feeling marginalised and oppressed. The conflict escalated quickly, with violence erupting in the streets and skirmishes breaking out across the country. The government, weakened by the exposure of their cloning program, was powerless to intervene. The war raged on for months, but no clear end in sight. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the country was plunged into chaos. But the clones, determined to prove themselves and assert their independence, fought with a ferocity that their non-clone counterparts simply could not match. They had been programmed for combat, and their training gave them a significant advantage on the battlefield. As the war drew to a close, it became clear that the clones had emerged victorious. They had proven that they were not mere copies of their non-clone counterparts, but rather unique individuals with their own thoughts and feelings. The non-clones were forced to concede, and the clones were given full citizenship and equal rights. It was a hard-fought victory, but one that was ultimately worth the sacrifices made on both sides. Sarah, who had been instrumental in the fight for the clones' freedom, found herself caught in the middle of the conflict. As a clone herself, she had struggled with her own identity and purpose in life. But in the end, she emerged as a leader and a symbol of hope for her fellow clones. Her bravery and dedication to the cause had inspired many, and her legacy lived on as a reminder of the power of unity and perseverance in the face of adversity. The Civil War had left deep scars on the country, but it also paved the way for a new era of acceptance and understanding. The clones had proven that they were just as capable as their non-clone counterparts, and the world was better off for it.